Yeah, keep an eye on that. In the meantime, U.S. President Donald Trump says that he is increasing tariffs on Canada due to an Ontario anti-tariff ad campaign. Trump announced on his social media that Canada will face an additional 10% in tariffs, quote, above what they're paying now. This comes just days after trade talks with Ottawa broke down. At the center of the dispute is a $75 million ad campaign launched by the Ontario government. Now, the ads, which aired on major U.S. networks, featured a clip from former President Ronald Reagan's 1987 speech on free trade, warning that tariffs hurt American workers and consumers. Premier Ford responding, saying Ontario will pause the campaign starting tomorrow. For more on the ongoing tariff dispute, we're joined by CTV political analyst Eric Ham. Thanks for joining us here on a Sunday morning. We appreciate it because things are escalating here with this the tariff war, which seems to be never ending. And now we have, Mark Carney and Donald Trump in Asia. But things can still continue to crumble, if you want to say, right now. What's your take right now on this 10% tariff boost on what we're already paying here?
Well, what we're seeing here is clearly the good cop, bad cop routine that Canada played, particularly with this endeavor right here, certainly shows that it has its limits. Premier Ford used this ad that certainly many Americans have seen, trying to shape and shift the narrative, which is actually, I think, very important. And of course, many Americans who may not be aware of what's happening, this certainly, I think, is creating more awareness of all of this. However, when you have a good cop, bad cop routine, we have to remember Donald Trump is always going to play the role of bad cop. And what we are seeing is he's willing to use American prestige, American influence, and American might in ways that will be detrimental to others, even if it also means there will be some pain, some hurt, some chaos for Americans. And that's what we're seeing from these continued tariffs. Prices are continuing to rise. Inflation is sky high. In fact, it has now crossed the 3% threshold, which was higher than when Donald Trump first came into office. But yet we continue to hear the president say how these tariffs are actually working for the United States. Now, Prime Minister Carney has to find a way to put that genie back in the bottle, perhaps on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit right now. Is that going to work? I don't think so, because again, we have seen that Donald Trump now announces these new tariffs, this new increase on tariffs. The only saving grace right now is the fact that luckily many of the goods and items coming into the United States from Canada are covered under the CUSMA agreement, which actually places a limit on how high many of the tariffs can be. But still, those that are not protected, we're seeing, particularly as it relates to steel, aluminum, and copper and other goods, are still causing tremendous problems for not only American and Canadian consumers, but also businesses on both sides of the border.
Yeah, and it continues to be hit hard. We're getting new reports every week about how tumultuous the landscape is right now. And President Trump has said on Air Force One, as you mentioned, they're going to Asia now, and Prime Minister Carney is there, and he says he's not planning on speaking with the Prime Minister. So what do you think? What kind of fires could potentially be put out?
It's interesting because Donald Trump has the disdain that he's held for Canada since coming back into office has not dissipated one bit. In fact, even though he has spoken very glowingly of the Prime Minister, that still does not change the way he feels about Canada. And Donald Trump has made this personal because he believes that Canada should be part of the United States. And so Donald Trump, in order to get to that place, has to look at Canada as if it's the enemy. And in doing so, he is shaping talking points that are factually untrue and saying that somehow Canada is taking advantage of the United States when that simply isn't the case. And again, we have seen nearly 5 years of economic integration in the region now basically crumble as Donald Trump continues to move in this direction where he wants to see Canada become part of the United States. And of course, a big reason for that is for the rare earth minerals, where now you've got China and the United States in this massive race. And Donald Trump believes he can actually change that by bringing countries like Canada and Greenland into American sovereignty, and he's willing to do so either by military and or economic force.
That's wild. Well, yeah, that's the overarching. That hasn't changed, as you mentioned. But neither has Premier Ford's involvement in all this. I know you're a White House correspondent, but I got to wonder, what the Trump administration is thinking about, not the prime minister. What he's saying, as you said, he talks very glowingly of Mark Carney. They're both kind of outsiders in the political world. But the premier of Ontario, who is paying the $75 million for this ad, which elicited this 10% boost. I could only imagine what he's thinking, and maybe even what Prime Minister Mark Carney is thinking about this ad that's taking a lot of the headlines.
Yeah, and you got to think that, of course, Carney has been a smooth operator in terms of how he's handled Donald Trump. We know he's been to the White House twice. Perhaps he was looking at some way to ingratiate himself even further with President Trump on this trip to Asia, to at least try to find a way to move negotiations forward. But even with all of that, we have seen a bevy of moves being made by Canada, basically moving on from the United States. In fact, the prime minister made those comments quite clear before he left for his trip to Asia. And now with Donald Trump, again, using tariffs more as a weapon and less of a tool to try to create some balance in trade, we see right now that clearly the prime minister was right. But nevertheless, I'm certainly sure he's not happy with what Premier Ford did. Yeah. And, of course, what that means for the potential for negotiations, not just on trade right now, but also when we look at Kuzma. And it's also important to note very quickly, Canada is the only G7 country right now that has yet to actually come to a trade agreement with the United States. That's not by happenstance, and that is certainly not by mistake. That's deeply intentional, and it's also fostered by President Trump as well.
All right. A lot of players in this, no doubt. You're an important one in terms of keeping us informed. CTV political analyst Eric Ham, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.